It was one of those evenings that felt like any other. Clara Bennett had just finished dinner and was settling into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea, when she heard it, a faint crackling sound almost like twigs snapping underfoot. At first, she thought nothing of it. Maybe the neighbors were having a bonfire or grilling something outside. But then came the smell. A thick, acrid stench filled the air, sharp enough to make her nose wrinkle. Clara frowned and got up from her chair. She walked over to the window, pulling back the curtain slightly. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. Dark, heavy smoke was billowing up in the distance, near the edge of their quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't coming from anyone's backyard grill. Something serious was happening. She quickly grabbed her phone and stepped out onto the porch. That's when she realized how bad things really were. Down the street, cars were already stopping, people pointing and yelling as they stared at the scene ahead. Clara squinted through the haze and saw a car crumpled against a tree, flames licking hungrily at its metal frame. Even from where she stood, she could feel the heat radiating off the wreck. Her stomach dropped. There was someone inside that car? Through the chaos of smoke and fire, she could barely make out the shadowy figure slumped over the steering wheel. No one else seemed brave enough, or maybe too scared to step forward. Emergency sirens screamed in the background, but help was still minutes away. Minutes that person might not have. Clara didn't stop to think twice. Her instincts kicked in. She ran back inside, snatched a thick woolen blanket from her couch, and bolted toward the burning vehicle. Her hands trembled as she gripped the blanket tightly. Every step closer to the inferno felt like stepping into a furnace. The heat hit her face like a wall, making her eyes water and her skin prickle uncomfortably. "Hey, is anyone hurt?" "Can you hear me?" Clara shouted, hoping against hope that the person trapped inside would respond. For a moment there was only silence except for the roar of the flames. Then, faintly, she heard a groan. Relief washed over her. It meant the driver was still alive. Clara moved faster, ignoring the fear clawing at her chest. She reached the car and tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. Panic bubbled up inside her. If she couldn't get the door open, all her effort would be for nothing. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, she pulled harder, pushing against the twisted metal frame until finally, with a loud creak, the door gave way. The rush of fresh oxygen caused the flames to flare up more intensely. Clara stumbled back for a second, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. But she didn't give up. She leaned in again, grabbing hold of the unconscious man by his shoulders. His clothes smelled burnt, and his body was limp, completely unresponsive. Pulling him out was harder than she imagined. Every movement felt like dragging a sack of bricks across jagged rocks, but Clara refused to let go. With gritted teeth and trembling arms, she managed to drag the man away from the car just moments before the flames exploded outward, consuming what little remained of the vehicle. Exhausted, she collapsed on the ground beside him, gasping for breath. Her vision blurred as tears mixed with sweat and soot streaked down her cheeks. By now, a small crowd had gathered around them. Someone called out, "Help is coming!" Another person handed Clara a bottle of water, urging her to drink. She nodded weakly, her throat raw and dry. In the distance, the wail of sirens grew louder. Paramedics rushed to the scene, taking over. From there, they carefully lifted the injured man onto a stretcher while firefighters worked to douse the remaining flames. As Clara sat on the curb, wrapped in the same blanket she'd used to shield herself from the fire, she watched everything unfold in a daze. One of the firefighters approached her, patting her shoulder gently. "You did good," he said firmly. "Really good." But Clara didn't feel like a hero. All she could think about was the man lying motionless on the stretcher. Who was he? Would he survive? And why had this happened? Later that night, after giving her statement to the authorities and answering countless questions, Clara returned home. Her body ached, and her mind raced with thoughts of the stranger whose life she had saved. She lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the events of the evening over and over again. Sleep eluded her. Instead, she prayed silently, hoping that somewhere, somehow, the man was okay. What Clara didn't know yet was that this act of bravery would change both their lives forever. Little did she realize that days later, the very person she had pulled from the flames would walk back into her world, not just as a grateful survivor, but as someone who would become deeply important to her. The days that followed felt strange for Clara. Life in her quiet little neighborhood went back to normal, or at least it tried to. The charred remains of the car were hauled away, and the tree where the crash happened was trimmed to remove the blackened bark. But Clara couldn't shake off the feeling that something inside her had shifted. Every time she passed by that spot on the road, her chest tightened. She could still see the flames in her mind, hear the crackling of the fire, and feel the weight of the man she'd pulled out of the wreckage. She kept replaying the moment when she saw his face, the way his eyes fluttered weakly as she dragged him away from the inferno. Who was he? Was he okay? These questions haunted her. She wanted answers but didn't know how to find them. All she knew was that she'd done what anyone should have done, what she hoped someone would do. For her, if she were ever in that situation, Clara tried to distract herself with her usual routine. She worked at a small cafe downtown, serving coffee and chatting with regular customers. But even there, her thoughts drifted back to the stranger. Some of her coworkers noticed she seemed distant. "You've been acting weird," one of them said during a slow afternoon shift. "What's going on?" Clara hesitated before answering. I just can't stop thinking about that accident," she admitted quietly. "About the guy in the car." Her coworker tilted their head sympathetically. "You saved his life." "You know, that's huge. Don't beat yourself up over it." But Clara wasn't sure if she deserved praise. Sure, she'd acted quickly, but it didn't feel like heroism. It felt like survival instinct, a gut reaction to seeing someone in trouble. Still, deep down, she couldn't deny that she cared about whether the man made it through. Meanwhile, miles away in a hospital room bathed in soft fluorescent light, the stranger was slowly waking up to a world he barely recognized. His name was James, though Clara didn't know that yet. When he first opened his eyes, everything was blurry, his vision clouded not just by painkillers but also by confusion. Where was he? What had happened? A nurse stood nearby, checking his vitals. "Welcome back," she said warmly. "You gave us quite a scare." James blinked, trying to piece together fragments of memory. He remembered driving home after a long day at work. Rain pelted his windshield and the roads were slick. Then nothing, just darkness. And then, faintly, he recalled flashes of someone pulling him free from the car. A voice calling out to him, hands gripping his arms tightly. "Who?" "Who got me out?" James croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. The nurse smiled. "A local woman named Clara Bennett. She risked her own safety to save you. You're lucky she was there." James lay back against the pillows, processing this information. He didn't know Clara, but already he owed her everything. As the days passed and he regained more strength, bits of the story came together. The paramedics told him how close he'd come to disaster. If Clara hadn't acted so fast, the outcome could have been far worse. Doctors patched him up, treating burns on his hands, bruises across his body, and a mild concussion, but the emotional toll lingered. James spent hours staring out the window, replaying the moments leading up to the crash. He couldn't shake the guilt of putting someone else in danger. Even though the accident hadn't been entirely his fault, the weather played a big role. He couldn't help but wonder why fate had chosen him to survive during his recovery. James learned more about Clara. Nurses mentioned her bravery, describing her as calm under pressure despite the chaos around her. One day, a visitor brought in a newspaper clipping featuring an article about the incident. There, on the front page, was a photo of Clara standing near the wreckage, covered in soot but determined. Her expression struck James. It was fierce, almost defiant, as if she refused to let fear win. He studied the picture for a long time, memorizing her features. Dark hair tied back into a messy ponytail, wide eyes filled with intensity, and a slight smudge of dirt on her cheek. She looked ordinary, yet extraordinary all at once. How could someone so unassuming possess such courage? As soon as he was discharged from the hospital, James knew exactly what he needed to do. He had to find Clara and thank her not just with words but with actions. He owed her more than gratitude. He owed her a debt he wasn't sure he could ever repay, but first he needed to prepare himself. Physically, he was healing, but emotionally, he still carried scars. The crash had shaken him to his core, forcing him to confront his own mortality. It reminded him of why he became a detective in the first place: to protect others, to ensure justice prevailed even in the darkest corners of society. Yet here he was, needing protection himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. James decided to visit Clara as soon as possible. He wanted to meet her face to face, to look her in the eye and express his appreciation. But he also wanted to learn more about her. Who was this woman who had risked her life without hesitation? What kind of person did it take to run toward danger instead of away from it? Little did James realize this decision would set off a chain of events neither of them could have predicted. Their lives, once separate and unknown to each other, were about to collide in ways neither of them expected. For now, though, all James focused on was finding Clara and saying those two simple words, "Thank you." And Clara? Well, she had no idea that the stranger she'd saved was preparing to step back into her life in uniform, no less. It had been 5 days since the fire, and Clara had finally started to settle back into her routine. The cafe was bustling as usual, and the customers seemed chattier than ever. But even amidst the familiar hum of coffee machines and laughter, Clara's mind kept wandering. She couldn't stop thinking about the man she'd saved. Was he okay? Had he recovered? Did he know how close he'd come to losing his life? She spent most of her evenings sitting by the window, staring out at the street. It wasn't that she expected him to show up or anything. It was just hard to shake the feeling that their paths weren't done crossing. Every time a car drove past or someone knocked on her door, her heart skipped a beat. She told herself it was silly that people didn't just walk into your life like that after something so intense. Life didn't work that way, did it? And then, one afternoon, it happened. Clara was home, folding laundry in the living room when she heard it, a sharp knock at the door. At first, she froze. Who could it be? She wasn't expecting anyone. Maybe it was a neighbor, or perhaps someone selling something. She set the clothes down and walked over to the door. Peeking through the peephole cautiously, what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. Standing there was the man, the same man she'd pulled from the burning car. Only now he looked different. He wasn't covered in soot or lying unconscious on a stretcher. Instead, he stood tall, dressed in a crisp uniform with a badge gleaming on his chest. His face was clean-shaven, his posture confident, but his eyes held a softness that immediately put her at ease. Clara hesitated for a moment before opening the door. "Hi," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Can I help you?" The man smiled warmly. "Miss Bennett?" he asked, his tone polite yet firm. When Clara nodded, he continued, "I'm Detective James Carter. I owe you my life." For a second, Clara forgot how to speak. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This was the man she'd saved? The person she'd thought about every single day since the accident? And here he was, standing right in front of her, looking healthier than she'd imagined. "Possible. You're the man from the crash," she stammered, still gripping the edge of the doorframe like it might steady her. "Are you all right?" "I will be," James replied, his smile widening. "And I wouldn't be if it weren't for you." He held out a bouquet of flowers, bright yellow sunflowers tied with a simple ribbon. They looked cheerful against the somber memories of that night. Clara took them hesitantly, unsure of what to say. "These are beautiful," she managed finally, her cheeks flushing. "But you really didn't have to do this." "I wanted to," James said simply. "You saved my life, Miss Bennett. That deserves more than just a thank you card." Clara laughed nervously, stepping aside to let him in. "Please call me Clara, and honestly, I didn't do anything special." Anyone would have done the same. James shook his head firmly as he entered the house. "No, not everyone would have done what you did. You ran toward danger while others stood back." "That takes courage, Clara, real courage." His words caught her off guard. No one had ever described her actions that way before. To her, it had just been instinct, a split-second decision to act without overthinking. Hearing James talk about it like it was something extraordinary made her feel both proud and uncomfortable. They sat down in her living room, the air between them charged with an odd mix of gratitude and curiosity. James explained everything: the crash, the injuries, the long days spent recovering in the hospital. He told her how much he admired her bravery and how he'd read about her in the local newspaper. Clara listened intently, nodding along as he spoke. When it was her turn to share, Clara found herself opening up in ways she hadn't expected. She talked about how scared she'd been during the fire, how the heat had felt unbearable, and how she doubted her own strength until the very last second. James listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. At one point, he leaned forward slightly, his voice softer now. "Do you mind if I ask you something personal?" he said. Clara raised an eyebrow. "Sure, go ahead." "Why do you think you did it?" he asked. "Why did you run toward the fire instead of away from it?" The question caught her off guard. She hadn't really thought about it before. After a pause, she shrugged. "I guess I don't know. I saw someone in trouble, and I couldn't just stand there and watch. It didn't feel like a choice. It felt like the only thing I could do." James nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something he already suspected. "That's why I became a detective," he admitted. "Because I can't stand by when people need help. Seeing you do the same thing, it reminds me why I love my job." Their conversation flowed easily after that, jumping from topic to topic. They talked about their families, their hobbies, and even their favorite foods. Clara learned that James had grown up nearby and joined the police force after college. He told her stories about some of the cases he'd worked on, making her laugh with his dry sense of humor. In return, Clara shared tales from her days working at the cafe, including a hilarious incident involving a spilled latte and a very angry customer. As the afternoon turned into evening, neither of them noticed time passing. It felt natural, comfortable, like they'd known each other for years instead of just hours. When James finally glanced at his watch, he groaned. "I should probably get going," he said reluctantly. "But I'd really like to see you again." "If that's okay," Clara blinked, surprised by the request. "Of course," she said quickly. "I'd like that too." James grinned, standing up and straightening his uniform. "Great. I'll figure something out and let you know. Until then," he paused, meeting her gaze. "Thank you again, Clara, for everything." As he walked out the door, Clara leaned against the wall, her heart pounding. She couldn't believe what had just happened. The man she'd saved had walked into her life, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who genuinely appreciated what she'd done. And somehow, in the span of a few hours, they'd connected in a way that felt deeper than mere gratitude. Later that night, as she lay in bed replaying their conversation, Clara realized something important. Saving James hadn't just changed his life, it had changed hers too. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, valued, like maybe, just maybe, her actions mattered more than she'd ever dared to believe. Little did she know this was only the beginning. The days that followed James's visit felt like they were moving in slow motion for Clara. She went about her routine, working at the cafe, running errands, and keeping her small apartment tidy, but her mind kept drifting back to their conversation. There was something about James that stayed with her, a quiet strength mixed with vulnerability that made him hard to forget. It wasn't just gratitude he radiated, it was respect. Respect for what she'd done, sure, but also for who she was. As a person, James, on the other hand, couldn't stop thinking about Clara either. He'd spent years building walls around himself, focusing solely on his work as a detective. His job demanded toughness, resilience, and emotional distance. But meeting Clara had cracked those walls ever so slightly. She reminded him of everything good in the world, the kind of goodness he sometimes forgot existed amidst the chaos of crime scenes and investigations. Her courage, her humility, her warmth, it all left an impression on him. True to his word, James reached out a few days later. He called Clara one evening while she was finishing up dinner. "Hey, it's James," he said when she answered, his voice steady but warm. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." Clara smiled, setting her plate aside. Not at all. How are you feeling? Better every day? He replied. Thanks to you? There was a pause before he continued. Listen, I was wondering if you'd like to grab coffee sometime. Or maybe lunch, my treat. Clara hesitated for only a second before saying yes. The idea of spending more time with James didn't feel strange or awkward. It felt right. They agreed to meet at a cozy little diner near the park, a place neither of them had been to before. When the day came, Clara arrived first, choosing a table by the window. She fidgeted nervously with the napkin dispenser, glancing outside every few seconds until she spotted him walking toward the entrance. James looked different today, out of uniform, wearing a simple leather jacket and jeans. It was refreshing to see him in such a casual setting, almost like glimpsing another side of him. Hey, he said as he slid into the booth across from her. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was brutal. No worries, Clara said, smiling. You're here now. They ordered sandwiches and shared stories over steaming cups of coffee. This time their conversation delved deeper. James opened up about why he became a detective, a story he rarely told anyone. Years ago, his younger sister had gone missing. Despite the best efforts of law enforcement, her case remained unsolved. Losing her changed him. It ignited a fire inside him to protect others, to make sure no family had to endure the same pain his did. Clara listened intently, her heart aching for him. That must have been so hard, she said softly. I can't imagine what that feels like. It was, James admitted, his gaze fixed on the tabletop. But it taught me something important, that justice matters. Even when it's messy, even when it doesn't bring back what you lost, it still matters. Clara nodded, understanding the weight of his words. In turn, she shared her own struggles. Growing up, she'd always been the quiet one, the helper, the person everyone leaned on but never truly saw. She confessed how she often doubted her worth, wondering if her actions made any real difference in the grand scheme of things. James shook his head firmly. Don't ever doubt yourself, Clara, what you did for me. It wasn't just saving a life, it gave me a second chance. A chance to keep fighting for what's right. That means something. Their connection deepened with each passing moment. They laughed, they reflected, and they found comfort in each other's company. By the end of the meal, Clara realized she hadn't felt this understood in a long time. And James? He walked away feeling lighter, as though sharing his burdens with someone who truly cared had lifted a weight off his shoulders. Over the next few weeks, they made it a point to see each other regularly. Sometimes it was coffee dates, other times long walks through the park. They talked about everything: childhood memories, favorite books, dreams for the future. With each meeting, their bond grew stronger. Clara admired James's dedication to his work, his unwavering commitment to protecting others. James, in turn, was captivated by Clara's kindness, her ability to find beauty in the smallest moments. One evening, as they sat together on the bench overlooking the lake, James turned to her with a serious expression. Clara, he began, there's something I need to tell you. She looked at him, sensing the gravity in his tone. What is it? I want you to know that I don't take what you did lightly, he said. You saved my life, and I'll never be able to repay you for that. But I also want you to know that you mean more to me than just gratitude. You've become important to me. Clara's breath hitched. She hadn't expected him to say that, though part of her had hoped he would. You've become important to me too, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable, it was full of unspoken emotions, of mutual understanding. Finally, James reached over and took her hand in his. It was a simple gesture, but it spoke volumes. Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Their relationship continued to blossom, built on trust, admiration, and shared vulnerability. But life has a way of testing even the strongest bonds. Just as they were beginning to explore these newfound feelings, danger reared its ugly head once again. It started with a phone call. Clara was at home, reading a book, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but curiosity got the better of her, and she answered. Hello? she said cautiously. A low, menacing voice responded. Stay away from him. Clara froze, her blood running cold. Who is this? She demanded, her voice trembling. What are you talking about? You know exactly who I'm talking about, the voice growled. Detective Carter. If you value your safety, you'll leave him alone. Before Clara could respond, the line went dead. Her hands shook as she stared at the phone, trying to process what had just happened. Who would threaten her? And why? Panic set in quickly, but Clara forced herself to stay calm. She dialed James's number immediately, explaining everything as soon as he picked up. To her relief, he didn't dismiss her concerns. Instead, he promised to look into it right away. When they met later that night, James' expression was grim. I think this might be connected to a case I'm working on, he explained. There's a group involved in some dangerous activities, arson, among other things. I suspect they may have tampered with my car the night of the crash. Clara's eyes widened. So the accident? It wasn't random? James shook his head. No, and now somehow they've figured out we're close, which puts you in danger. Fear gripped Clara, but determination quickly followed. We'll figure this out together, she said firmly. Whatever it takes? James looked at her, admiration shining in his eyes. You amaze me, you know that? Most people would run the other way. Well, I'm not most people, Clara replied, with a small smile, and so they devised a plan. Using James' investigative skills and Clara's quick thinking, they pieced together clues that led them closer to the truth. Together, they uncovered evidence linking the group to several recent crimes. Each step forward brought them closer to justice, but also closer to danger. As tensions mounted, Clara and James relied on each other. Their partnership wasn't just romantic. It was rooted in mutual support and shared purpose. Facing adversity together only strengthened their bond, proving that what they had was far greater than either of them could have imagined. Little did they know, their journey was far from over. The final showdown awaited, and it would test them in ways they couldn't anticipate. But one thing was certain, they wouldn't face it alone. The closer Clara and James got to unraveling the truth, the more dangerous things became. The threats weren't just empty words anymore. They were real, lurking in every shadow, waiting to strike. Clara tried to stay brave, but there were moments when fear crept in, gnawing at her confidence. She'd never been involved in anything like this before. Her world had always been small and predictable, working at the cafe, chatting with customers, living a quiet life. But now, she found herself entangled in something far bigger than she could have imagined. James noticed her unease. One evening, as they sat together in his apartment poring over case files and maps, he reached across the table and took her hand. You don't have to do this, you know, he said softly. I can handle it from here? Clara shook her head immediately. No way, she replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. This isn't just your fight anymore. They came after me too. We're in this together. Her determination surprised even herself. Just weeks ago, she would have shied away from confrontation. But everything had changed since that night by the burning car. Saving James hadn't just given him a second chance, it had awakened something inside her. A strength she didn't know she possessed. And now, standing beside him felt like the most natural thing in the world. Their investigation led them deeper into the criminal underworld of their city. Through James' contacts in law enforcement and some clever sleuthing on Clara's part, they uncovered a web of corruption involving arson, extortion, and even ties to organized crime. The group responsible wasn't just reckless. They were calculated, ruthless, and desperate to protect their operations. Every clue they found brought them closer to exposing the ringleader, but also closer to putting themselves directly in harm's way. One chilly night, while reviewing surveillance footage James had obtained, Clara spotted something crucial. It was subtle, a license plate partially visible in the corner of the frame, but enough to confirm their suspicions about one of the key players. Excited, she pointed it out to James. Look, that's the guy we've been looking for. James leaned in, his eyes narrowing as he studied the screen. You're right, he said, grabbing his notebook. This is it. This could finally break the case wide open. But with progress came risk. The next day, as James followed up on the lead, he realized they were being watched. A black sedan trailed him through the streets, its windows tinted, so dark he couldn't see who was inside. His instincts screamed danger. He drove cautiously, taking turns designed to lose the tail, but the car stayed close behind. Eventually, he managed to evade it, but the message was clear. They knew he was onto them. When he met Clara later that evening, he told her what happened. "We need to be careful," he warned. "These people aren't messing around. If they think we're closing in, they'll stop at nothing to silence us." Clara nodded, her heart pounding. "Then we need to move fast," she said, "before they get to us first." Working late into the night, they pieced together a plan. With the evidence they'd gathered, they decided to set a trap. James would arrange a meeting under the pretense of offering information to the syndicate, while Clara would stay hidden nearby, ready to call for backup if things went south. It was risky, but they had no other choice. Time was running out. The day of the meeting arrived, and tension hung heavy in the air. James dressed casually, trying to blend in as he walked into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town, the designated location. Clara waited outside in her car, gripping her phone tightly, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of trouble. Her pulse raced as she listened to James's updates through a discreet earpiece. Inside, James faced off against the ringleader, a tall, imposing man with cold, calculating eyes. "What do you want?" The man growled, clearly suspicious. "I'm here to make a deal," James replied calmly. "Information for protection. You've got enemies everywhere, and I know who they are." The man smirked, folding his arms. "And why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the only one who can keep you ahead of them," James shot back, his tone sharp. For a moment, the room fell silent. Then, without warning, the man signaled to his henchman, who lunged forward, grabbing James roughly. "Nice try," the ringleader sneered. "But we already know who sent you." Panic surged through Clara as she heard the commotion through the earpiece. She knew she had to act quickly. Keeping her cool, she dialed emergency services, whispering urgent details about the situation. Then, clutching a flashlight and a tire iron from her trunk, she crept toward the building. Peering through a cracked window, she saw James struggling against the men holding him. Adrenaline coursed through her veins as she made a split-second decision. She burst through the door, shouting, "Let him go!" Everyone froze, stunned by her sudden appearance. The ringleader turned to glare at her, his expression darkening. "Who the hell is this?" he barked. "She's nobody," James interjected, buying time. "Just leave her out of this." But Clara refused to back down. Stepping closer, she held up her phone. "I've already called the cops," she lied, hoping her bluff would work. "They'll be here any minute." The ringleader hesitated. Glancing between James and Clara, in that brief moment of uncertainty, James seized the opportunity. With a swift motion, he broke free from his captors, tackling the leader to the ground. Chaos erupted as the henchmen scrambled to intervene, but Clara sprang into action, swinging the tire iron to fend them off. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. Realizing they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered, the criminals fled, leaving their leader behind. By the time officers stormed the warehouse, James and Clara stood victorious. Battered but alive. As the dust settled, they looked at each other, both exhausted but relieved. "You were incredible," James said, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Thank you for everything." Clara smiled weakly, leaning into him. "We make a pretty good team, don't we?" In the days that followed, the authorities dismantled the syndicate, arresting dozens of members and bringing justice to countless victims. The city breathed a collective sigh of relief, and Clara and James became local heroes. Their story spread quickly how a brave woman saved a stranger from the flames, only for him to walk back into her life in uniform and stand by her side through unimaginable danger. But for Clara and James, the accolades mattered less than the bond they'd forged. Together they had faced fear, fought for justice, and proven that courage comes in many forms. What started as an act of selflessness had blossomed into something neither of them expected: love, months later, as they strolled hand in hand along The same park where they'd shared so many conversations? Clara paused, gazing at James thoughtfully. Do you ever wonder how different our lives would be if that night hadn't happened? She asked. James smiled, squeezing her hand gently. I don't wonder, he replied, because I know I wouldn't trade this for anything. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, Clara knew he was right. Their journey had been unpredictable, challenging, and sometimes terrifying, but it had also been worth every step.